One of the most worrying things about the male bashing that's going on in our society is the tilting of basic legal protections in favour of women and against men. I'm talking today to a very brave lawyer who's been speaking out about this anti-male shift in our laws for many years now. Augusto Zimmermann is a former law reform commissioner from Western Australia. He's a professor and academic lawyer who's won many awards for his research and teaching. He spent 10 years at Murdoch University, including a period as Associate Dean of the Law School. Last year, he left Murdoch after finding himself becoming increasingly uncomfortable about the feminist agenda being promoted in the school. The goal of the school is now to promote social justice and particularly the role and the legal standing of women. What a great way to train new lawyers. Welcome, Augusto. It's lovely to have you here.
It's great to see you again, Bettina.
Yeah. I want to go back and start off by looking at when we first got in contact. It was a couple of years ago. You were Law Reform Commissioner for Western Australia, and the Commission had been asked by the West Australian government to look at proposed changes to laws regarding domestic violence. Now, I want you to tell me about that. I mean, the Commission ended up including these changes were a really lousy idea. Is that right?
Well, totally. What surprised me is that the report of the Commission was not really taken into consideration. The Attorney General claimed to be relying on the report, but everything we have recommended was not really taken into account.
Yeah. Now, the sort of changes they were proposing was to expand the definition of domestic violence to include emotional abuse, to include financial abuse, whatever that is. Tell me about that.
Well, that's the tragic reality of the situation, because the old-fashioned concept, the traditional understanding of domestic violence is no longer accepted by the law of this country. What we have is a very creative understanding of violence. And as a result, some people have basically lost their real rights, their individual rights, as a result of false accusations of domestic violence or on very spurious grounds.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and the particularly dangerous thing is you don't need actual evidence of violence. They've now included threat of violence in the West Australian laws, the idea that violence could occur. Is that right? Could you tell me about that?
Well, that's another problem, that the rules of evidence are being undermined. I think there is an attempt on the part of the government to undermine due process of law, or at least reduce the historical idea that people have the right to be innocent, to be considered innocent until guilt can be proven. So some people are now being accused and labeled as perpetrators of domestic violence. As a matter of fact, there is no such proof or evidence being provided that they have actually committed any crime whatsoever.
And of course, they don't have to have committed the crime. It's usually, of course, a woman making the allegation, and she can just say that she's afraid it could happen. And that's enough.
That is enough, but you think about, as you said, the instance of accusation of financial abuse. Sometimes it might be that you are not willing to share your bank account with your spouse. That can be now regarded as an instance of domestic violence because it's called financial violence. That's another evidence that the concept of domestic violence is being extended to such a point that even if you decided to have your own bank account, not a sole bank account, that can be considered an instance of violence.
Mm-hmm. When this was all being discussed publicly and the Law Reform Commission was releasing their conclusions around this, I gather a lot of debate, prominent lawyers and so on were very much speaking out, warning that they didn't agree with the proposed changes. Is that right?
Well, I was very fortunate to be supported by some very well-known lawyers here in Western Australia who were fully aware of the problems I have raised. For instance, one of the lawyers is called Simon Crick, and he wrote an article in the West Australian newspaper. He's an outstanding family lawyer, basically confirming that unfortunately some people have taken advantage of these bad laws when it comes to obtaining an upper hand at family law disputes. Of course, if you manage to get rid of your spouse, you have an advantage when it comes to property settlement. There is also, as I have mentioned before, on other occasions, the link between child support payment and false allegations of domestic violence.
Yeah, well, I want to go on to the family law in a minute, but just in terms of those legislative changes, essentially the point was that the government, the Attorney General, took no notice of your recommendations and went ahead and instituted these changes. And the police commissioner, who's a woman, spoke out and said she was, that they were happy to err on the side of the victim.
This is appalling.
Yeah.
I was absolutely horrified that a police commissioner would make such an outrageous statement. It's a total disregard for due process of law and natural justice. But what I believe is actually that she's saying that we can err on the side of a person who is in the process of destroying not only one innocent life, because sometimes this person happens to be a mother or a father. It's actually destroying the lives of innocent children as well. So it's actually, she's saying that it's possible to err on the side of a person who is undermining the lives of innocent people.
Yeah, and I know you've spoken out about the fact that there's also a pro-arrest policy that the police have where any allegation like this, they are inclined to leap in and arrest people rather than testing the evidence, as you say, rather than investigating it. That's often the first step. And I know you've had a whole lot of guys people contacting you about this, talking about, the allegation is made and they come home and discover they're, end up being arrested. Can you tell me about some of those men who've been contacting you? I think there was one who was an elderly man in his 70s that really struck me.
Well, this person was living inside his car. Well, basically, the wife was not happy to be living with him, and she went to the police and said, "My husband is not nice to me because he's verbally abusive." Some people are actually not aware of the fact that verbal abuse constitutes a form of domestic violence, and it might actually be the case that the person who goes to the police and makes the accusation instigates this verbal abuse, because you can actually be provoked by the person. Yeah. In many ways, it's the person who goes to the police who is actually causing the problem, because it's a common strategy now being adopted. So this poor man was leaving his car because his wife decided that it would be good for her to not have him around. And if you try to make a phone call to ask what's happening, then you go to jail, because that can actually be is considered to be a disrespect of the court order, is a violation of the court order, and you might face jail as a result. Yeah,
I mean, I've got people writing to me from all over Australia about being in that situation where, I mean, for instance, the children will ring up the man, and they're not even, if they're, if an ABO has been in place, they can't even answer the phone when they hear their child's voice on the answering machine, because that would be a violation of the terms of that order. And women are, I mean, look, in this situation, there's no question that women are deliberately trying to get men into a situation where they do get arrested and do go to jail, and they do breach their AVOs.
Mm-hmm. Well, and think about it. I had this yesterday coming to me, the story of a person who happens to be a foreigner, and he was engaged in a relationship with an Australian girl, and they end up having a child. Now the girl is not willing to talk to this person, is not willing to see him again, but she actually has a child with this person. and decided to go to the police and say, well, I think it was a justice of the peace, because then the person receives immediately the restraining order. It's going to be initially an interim restraining order. Yeah. But what happened with this person is that he didn't know about the laws in this country. He was horrified because he cannot see his kid again. And he actually gave her a phone call just to ask, I'm not understanding what's happening, because I'm not a violent person. I just want to be able to see my child. And then she called the police, of course, and said, look, this man called me and I have a restraining order. Well, he was arrested as a result.
Yeah, yeah.
It's happening all the time.
It's happening all the time. And one of the things in the research you've done and in the articles you've written, you quote some of the information, the research we have with, for instance, looking at magistrates, where magistrates have been surveyed and they acknowledge that this is being used as a weapon in family law cases.
They acknowledge, but not necessarily do justice. What I find it very remarkable is that it's no longer the family law system applying justice. What happens is that even if the magistrate is aware of the fact that the accusation is, as they call, unsubstantiated, and you might expect that false accusations will always be 100% unsubstantiated, the magistrate not necessarily punish the person who made the accusation. Quite to the contrary, the custody is normally kept with the person who made the false accusation. It's very hard also to evict the person from the property, and the person is actually living inside the premises of the other person who was the victim of the false accusation. Yeah. So in many ways what's happening is that the court is not actually dealing with this matter and really recognizing that this injustice, this terrible aggression to another person's innocent person has been done. The matter is being dealt properly.
One of the things I thought was just shocking that you mentioned in one of your articles that when courts deal with accusation of domestic violence in New South Wales, they get on average 3 minutes to make a decision about the evidence in that sort of case, which is just appalling when you consider the implications for the man's life.
Yeah, this is another thing. Is like this is becoming an industry. And further considerations are no longer taken into proper account. So if that is the case, I think the magistrates are also a bit worried of not granting the order, because they don't know exactly what took place. And since the feminist lobby is so powerful and the pressure is so considerable, the magistrate preferred to do what the minister here, the police minister here, recommended, that is to err on the side of the accuser. Yeah.
And the police will tell you that too. I know so many people who've been in that situation where the police have taken, at some point in the whole proceedings have said to the bloke, look, that's just the system, there's nothing we can do, and will admit privately to the men that it's a real setup. But of course, publicly, they'll deny ever having said such a thing.
Yes. Well, look, I have my encounters with police officers. I have my encounters with victims of the system. And what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. Some police officers actually have told me that they acknowledge the problem. I just don't know how they can have the conscience clear and to be able to operate within a system that provides such gross instances of injustice. I think it's time for the police force in this country and all people of goodwill to be rebelling against this, because it's, if we consider ourselves a country under the rule of law, we have to review this as a matter of urgency, because I don't believe we really have protection of individual rights in this country, at least fully applied. And certainly the idea of the rule of law has been considered in the mind as a result of this flawed system. Yeah. Let's stop calling this a court of justice, because justice is no longer the case.
But I want to move on. One of the things you've also got involved in recently was the whole broader family law issue. And George Brandis made, to me, a really stupid decision when he was setting up a new review of the family law system, which is particularly looking at how it deals with domestic violence and child abuse. And who does he appoint as the chair of this commission? Professor Helen Rhodes, who has an incredible reputation for, in my view, for anti-male bias. I mean, she's written an enormous number of publications in this area around family violence. And Rhodes also promotes the work of Jennifer McIntosh. I've talked about her before. Jennifer McIntosh is a psychologist in Melbourne whose work has, well, a panel of over 100 experts in child development analysed her research, which has been extremely influential in denying children, little children, children under 3, contact with their fathers, overnight contact with their fathers. McIntosh's work has been discredited, and yet Rhodes continues to promote her. So there's a whole lot of evidence out there that he was appointing someone who was in no way going to be seen as dispassionate and unbiased. And yet he went ahead and put her in charge of this commission. And I know you've put in a submission to that commission. Can you tell me about some of the other areas that concern you in relation to family law?
Well, I think I have mentioned to you that one of the strategies to avoid shared custody is precisely to initiate proceedings and claims as a result of domestic violence. And sometimes what happens is that the innocent parent is actually accused, even not only, I must say, of abusing of the wife or the husband, but he might also be accused of committing child abuse and even sexual molestation of children. And so this matter is very serious, and the person is then entirely prevented from seeing the kids. And even after the matter is investigated, and then you have a report from the Department of Child Protection clearly making the point that the accusation is false, the person is basically without connecting with these children for more than 7 months, 8 months, because this thing takes time to be proven.
Well, it takes years to get into family court quite often, doesn't it?
Well, and that is the financial reward that I have mentioned in some of my articles, that these people are really being financially rewarded. There is a connection between these and, more payments.
Late last year, you resigned from Murdoch. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, Augusto?
Certainly the push comes from certain elements in the school. And these people think that we should be a more pro-feminist law school. I don't agree with that, because I think that what we need to have is academic freedom. Well, this is a tax-paying or payers university, so we pay with our taxes this university, and we should have full freedom, academic freedom. And I don't think that put ideology in a law school is a very good thing to do, because I think we should be there in the pursuit of truth, and also accepting that people might have different opinions and positions. I really think that what is missing there is a little bit more of tolerance, a little bit more of free speech, a little bit more of freedom, academic freedom for the academics over there. And I got really tired of this whole thing, because I think my right to freedom is important, and I decided to leave as a result.
Yeah, and you're now, can you tell us where you are now?
Well, now I'm working at Sheridan College. I'm very happy to be here, because they tell me that I'm not going to be persecuted, or I'm going to be opposed just for having an opinion that perhaps it's not popular. I think what we need is to be sometimes even countercultural, because that was the role of academics in the past, to be cutting edge, and to be perhaps even challenging the establishment. And I think that's what I do with my work, sometimes having to speak the truth to those who are in power.
And of course, sadly, those who are in power are now very often pushing a feminist agenda.
Yes.
And that's a pretty sad thing, particularly when it comes to rights for men and for their children in Australia.
Yeah, well, that makes a very exciting time for both of us. We have so much to do in this country. When I came to Australia, I thought I would have a very peaceful and quiet life. That's certainly not happening.
Oh, I can imagine. Well, we're very glad to have you, Augusto, and I wish you well in this new phase of your career. And I hope you'll continue to speak out about these issues.
Thank you very much. I'm a great admirer of your work.
Thanks, Augusto.
Thank you.